Welcome back to the Total Confidence Podcast. I'm your host, Ahmad Wazir. Have a special treat. One of the OGs of the Enneagram. I've been excited to speak with you. And one of the reasons I'm excited to speak with you because you rarely talk about yourself. And so I wanted to get a chance to really I've rarely heard you talk about yourself. And so I was excited to get to know you on another level. This is Peter O'Hanrahan. I've been practicing saying your name right.
Oh, thank you.
Peter is a leading Enneagram teacher and trainer worldwide. Since 1978, he has presented the Enneagram to a wide variety of groups, including corporations, nonprofits, university staffs, small businesses, churches, and professional associations. He regularly teaches Enneagram workshops in the US, Europe, and China, which is how I met you in the workshop. He is an associate of Enneagram Worldwide and the Enneagram Professional Training Program with David Daniels, MD, and Helen Palmer. And for the past 20 years, has helped to train and certify more than 800 Enneagram professionals from a variety of the fields in business, psychology, religion, coaching, and spiritual counsel. Peter has presented business applications of the Enneagram at conferences of the American Society for Training and Development, the Organizational Development Network, the International Enneagram Association. He is the co-author of the Enneagram Workplace Guide, Transformational Leadership, which is used by companies and university graduate programs. He is a senior associate with Ginger Lapid Wagner, had to practice her name too, the Enneagram in Business Train the Trainers Program. With 45 years professional experience as a counselor and trainer, Peter also offers Enneagram coaching and consultation to individuals, couples, and groups. Pleasure to have you. And I'll share how I met you. I am on course with the narrative Enneagram tradition, and you have led several of my courses. So I feel like during COVID, it was a blessing in disguise because I got to connect with you. I've been wanting to join this program for years since I started studying Enneagram. But anyway, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the Total Confidence Podcast. How you doing?
Well, good. We just came off an exciting conference in San Francisco, as you know.
Oh, it was amazing. I had an amazing time. It was good to meet you and Pat.
Yeah, in person, right. That was the greatest part of seeing people in person again after, well, it's been 4 years since we had a conference like that. Yeah.
I didn't know it was that long. Wow. Okay. Man. So, Peter, just with your experience, man, I'm curious to when people ask you now, what is the Enneagram? How do you respond now? Like, if somebody just came up to you on the street and said, what is this Enneagram thing? How would you describe it?
I'd say it's a system of 9 personality types. It's great practical psychology for understanding ourselves and the people in our lives. It's used in a lot of different ways wherever people gather and need to cooperate and get along, and helps us reduce conflict and increase cooperation and understanding.
That's a very simplified version. I kind of tend to go on and on, but thank you. I need to kind of reduce my I read in your bio that you were first introduced to the Enneagram in 1978 by Helen Palmer. What was your first impression of the Enneagram, and how has your view of the Enneagram evolved over the years?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a big question. You might have to help me out on this one. But, I was a young holistic counselor in Berkeley in the 70s. I got there in 75, kind of as a refugee from all the intense political movements of the early 1970s. I used to be around Washington, D.C., and came out to Berkeley along with my partner at that time to study holistic health and body work and alternative medicine and all that good stuff, because we needed that. We were kind of, we'd gotten some, we were not in great shape. And we found that in Berkeley, in the San Francisco Bay Area, And a couple of years later, and we also found Helen Palmer, who was a kind of a trusted advisor. She taught meditation, she taught intuition. And one point in 78, Helen actually called the house. I was living in a group house. And mostly because the women were in the house, and women had been studying intuition with Helen Palmer. I did it a little bit, but they were really involved with Helen Palmer. And Helen said, "Look, there's this class happening, and you should go." And we just said, "Okay, whatever. It's Helen. We'll go." And it turned out we got to a neighborhood in Berkeley, and there was a line down the block, and we're like, wow, I think we were the last people that got in the door because there were so many people. And of course, the next week it got taken to a larger, hall. And it was the first Enneagram class, first public Enneagram class taught by Dr. Kathleen Spieth, who had been an close associate and partner with Claudio Naranjo. And Claudio and his group and had been working with it kind of inside the group. But Kathy had decided, well, she was going to start a public class. And so we got there, and it was wonderful to see that every week there'd be this panel of people talking about their experience. And this was cool. I was very involved in studying psychology. And this is a great way to learn psychology. It's like, wow, they're all talking about a particular theme, even though they're different ages and, genders and race and all that stuff. And so that was great. And then it came to my night. And I was like floored, what I mean? It was type 8 night. And it would just hit me very hard, not in a bad way, but in a very good way. And because here were people talking about what I thought was very similar to my own experience and my way of seeing the world. And so it kind of opened up a door for me, not only to understand myself, which, started me on a certain path, but also I felt included in the community more, like, oh, there's a place for me. I'm not just this strange, kind of overly assertive guy who, makes people uncomfortable. Actually, there's a place for me in the community. So that's where I began. And that was just, you had to be here in the Bay Area, and you had to hear about it from somebody. There were no books. And so for the first 10 years, it wasn't until, well, maybe 86, 87, the first Enneagram books came out. And that changed everything, because people all around the world now, first around the country, but then all in other countries, because they were translated, started learning about the Enneagram, and things kind of took off. And then one of the people who had come to Helen, and I should say that soon after Kathleen Spieth was teaching the Enneagram, Helen Palmer started teaching as well. And it was all done through panels. And so there'd be like 100 people at my place on Friday night, because I had a big studio, and Dr. Spieth came there. And then there'd be like 200 people at the YWCA on Sunday night, like hundreds of people every week at these classes. But that was just, again, in the Bay Area until the books got published. And then, as Claudia Naranjo would say, the cat was out of the bag, which is true. So, and then now, of course, it's remarkable to see it have being spread so far around the world. Because at first we didn't know, like here was this kind of strange looking symbol and had a strange name. It's like this California thing, and we didn't know if it was going to be go anywhere beyond California, but of course it did. And then going to other places around the world, we realized that actually all the types are there. There's a cultural overlay in each different country and culture, right? There's a certain style. But right underneath that, there were the 9 types. And of course, we realized this when we were interviewing people on panels, and they start talking about the same things, that we were familiar with. So, I mean, everybody is an individual, right? Nobody can be reduced to an Enneagram type. Everybody has an, inner essence, the core self. They can't be categorized. But in this world, we have to have a personality, and Enneagram says, well, there's 9. Works pretty well.
How have you personally, what's the difference between Peter Hanrahan that first encountered the Enneagram and the Peter of today?
Well, I was on a path of growth at the time, and when the Enneagram showed up. And Kathy Spieth was not only my Enneagram teacher, but also became my mentor and therapist. And so it was combined with a lot of good psychological work. And also some of the Gurdjieff work that came in because Kathy Spieth was familiar with that. So it was a lot of deep work, and which I'm grateful for now because, I was a pretty angry young 8 back in the day, and it was very hard on me, and it's hard on my relationships. And people told me that, and I kind of got the message after a while. But I had a lot of work to do, and so the Enneagram provided kind of I probably would have I've been working on that anyway, but the Enneagram created such a great view of my type structure. It was so effective, and it also explained a lot about why I was the way I was. And it was, so that was really, really helpful. And so it accelerated my path of growth, and it changed my life, really changed my way of being. In fact, people sometimes say, well, you can't be an 8 because you're not angry enough. That kind of makes me angry, but I try not to, whatever. But actually I am very much an 8, but I'm what can I say? I'm not, my personality has changed in a lot of ways, but my basic type structure has not changed. I'm still type 8. I just think I'm friendlier version these days. Amazing. So it's been a big deal. And also my marriage, I probably wouldn't be married to my wife, Pat, all these years if we hadn't had the Enneagram, because she's a 4, and 8 and 4 is a kind of a dramatic combination and wonderful in its ways, but kind of, fiery. And so we had the Enneagram, and it got us through and helped us raise our kids. And I don't have as many kids as you do, but I have 3 I'm proud of. So you know what I mean.
Indeed.
It helps in the marriage.
Absolutely. Yeah. Use it in real ways. I'm glad you said that, that you use it in practical. Of course you do. Because I think it loses meaning when we just keep it intellectualized and not actually translated in our real life. So I'm glad you mentioned that. You mentioned that you studied with Kathleen Spieth. For several years. What are some of your biggest takeaways during that time when you studied with her?
Well, she was a brilliant psychologist. She was so articulate and clear in her speaking. She also had a very strong heart. And so she could be very critical on the one hand, but also very compassionate. It was a great combination. And so that's something I learned from her, that like she would say things like, always be kind to your younger self. You know what I mean? Because we didn't know what we know then. And we can always look back at our younger self and go, oh, gosh, why did I, whatever. And so that was very helpful, to always be kind to the younger person that I was. And there was another thing she said, which is be tough on personality, but kind to essence. She was very clear about the difference between personality and essence, which I think came from her involvement with the Gurdjieff work. Gurdjieff talked about that. Gurdjieff, was the guy that brought the modern Enneagram symbol to the West in about 1915 in Russia. Although he didn't do the personality types, the rest of the Enneagram was there, and that provided the basis for others to come along and, kind of organize human beings around the Enneagram. So that was very good. It's like, be true to your inner self. And then she also just taught me a lot of good psychology that I applied in my own life, and of course I applied in my work as a counselor.
Awesome. I also read that you started teaching in 1981.
Right.
You started your first Enneagram study group, and then started teaching classes. What is the difference between teaching then and teaching the Enneagram now?
I think, one of the big differences, well, first of all, we've developed things, of course, over the years. That was like 40 years ago. I had a lot of very intensive years of study with Dr. Spieth and also with Helen Palmer. And so by the 3-year mark, I was like, gee, I could do a study group. And they agreed. And then a couple of years later, I started doing panel classes. And I think we've gotten more sophisticated around understanding the three centers. Again, this is not unique to the Enneagram, the idea that we have these three centers of intelligence, head, heart, and body. But I think understanding how the type structures are based in all three centers. And also as a practitioner, and I was a hands-on body worker in part of my practice. And so I worked with a lot of people kind of physically, somatically, and came to understand actually that there are these somatic patterns or neurobiological patterns, temperaments, if you will. And we realized that actually that when we first started the Enneagram, we could look back in our childhoods and say, well, this is why I became a type whatever, because this happened to me. And then after a while, we became parents. And you probably know this, that the kids show up with a certain something. They don't show up blank slate. It's like when we started realizing, wait a minute, we didn't become our type because this happened to us in childhood.
Yep.
Although I want to honor that and understand that, but
Mm-hmm.
we're pretty much born with it. And there is a body level biological pattern for each of the 9 types. I think that's very important. And that fits into the model of the 3 centers. There's an emotional habit, used to be called the passion. We can call it an emotional habit. And then there's a way of seeing the world or a point of view. It's a habit of attention. So the type is really in all 3 centers kind of working together in a holistic system. And, we can work directly with each of those centers at times because that's what's called for. So that's one of the things that changed. And also, I think the other thing is that we became more appreciative of the types. When we were first learning the Enneagram types, it was from a very critical point of view. Like your ego is bad or something. It was kind of steeped in a kind of a traditional spiritual traditions where say, well, you have to, your ego is in the way of your spiritual development and so on. And there's some truth in that. But what we realize is that, no, we actually having an ego is a good thing, a necessary thing. We want to have improve our personality types. And we also want to get back to our inner selves. We don't want that split, but we have to appreciate, again, having kids help, because what are we going to tell the kids? Your personality is neurotic and weird. And no, we're going to tell the kids, you're beautiful.
Yes.
You're wonderful.
Yes.
And then it occurred at some point, well, maybe we could tell ourselves that too. Parents could take some of that on and say, we're all wonderful and beautiful in our ways. All 9 types have a major contribution to the human community. And there's things that we can work on.
I'm glad you said it like that. That's beautiful because, it's kind of like I'm guilty of this, falling into this. I'm a 5 and this is wrong with me. And it does have the positive attributes as well. So I'm glad you gave both sides of that. Actually, the very first book that I read, I was an aspiring rapper in a rap group with my cousin and a couple of friends, and just all the one day, had to be around 96. He handed me Helen Palmer's book. And
Wow.
he said, hey, man, you need to read this because I'm a 4, and I think you're a 4 too. You're a tragic romantic. And I read it, and I thought I was a 4. So when you were talking about the formative years and it being in California when the books came out, here I am in Richmond, Virginia, young man, aspiring rapper. And I get a book and that changed the trajectory of my life, man. And so I'm grateful that y'all put the work in at that time, and I'm a beneficiary of those days. Which leads me to my next question. What have been the greatest challenges, some of the greatest challenges in establishing this work, especially in the early days?
Well, in the early days, it was the name and the symbol put people off, and I don't blame them because, I was a California guy at the time, and even I thought it was kind of like, this, I'm not sure about this one. I was quickly persuaded. So getting it across to people, like, look, it's a number set. It's a geometric diagram. People use number sets and diagrams to organize information. This is a 9-gram. If it was a triangle or a square or a pentagon, or whatever. Maybe it would have been easier for people, but this
Yeah.
9-gram was kind of new, and so that was a problem at first. Um, and it really, the Enneagram was kind of a small thing for a while. I mean, there were the books, and you were touched by it all across the country, and that started happening. So there was generally, for a number of years, it was kind of quietly moving throughout different places in the world. And then at some point, there was some kind of critical mass where people started hearing about it a little bit, or they start asking, maybe you had this experience. Somebody would say, well, what's going on with you? Or how come you're a little different than you used to be? Or and you say, well, there's this Enneagram system and it's really helpful. And then at a certain point, it kind of took off. And there's been these waves that have come and gone. I think getting it into, I mean, now it's in a lot of the churches, it's in a lot of organizations and corporations, and in some ways it moved more quickly in other countries. And that kind of came back, you know what I mean? Because people in the United States would hear about, people in Netherlands, in Holland, or in France, or in Finland, where they were really using this Enneagram system and for personal growth and for professional development. And so, they didn't have a problem with that. And so people started hearing about that. And so, and then today, one of the things that's still an issue is people say, well, where's the scientific research? And, in psychology, it's not, I mean, psychology is kind of a science, but it's also, also an art, if you will.
Yeah.
And, I say, well, we know a lot because of hundreds of thousands of people around the world now have reported on their experiences. And we pay attention to that. We didn't just make it up. Mm-hmm. We hear it from people. And so we have lots of those accounts from people from all different countries. And it's impressive when you hear people talking about a similar theme. So that's my friendly response. My other response is, the whole mental health system in this country is run off what's called the DSM, right? The Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. And it's because you got to get a diagnosis in order to get money from the insurance companies. And so every therapist, every psychologist, has to pay attention to the DSM and what the diagnosis is. And that's not backed up by a lot of scientific evidence either. That's the best product of experienced, smart, well-meaning psychologists getting together for a week or two every few years and putting their heads together and coming up with their best understanding. And so we it's good to have that, but let's not pretend that, in the regular field of mental health and all these billions of dollars being spent, that there's a lot of scientific evidence behind all that. There's not. And it's coming more now, right? Medical science, I got busted on this the other day. I was talking about the neurobiology of the types, and a doctor said to me, well, where's the medical science behind this? And I'm like, well, there's not. It's like, she's like, how can you say this? Because I've been there with all these people. I've felt their bodies. I understand their breathing patterns. I know this stuff from my own years of 40 years of practice. The point being that sometimes medical science takes the lead, which is wonderful. Thank goodness we have medical science. Yeah. And then sometimes medical science kind of catches up to things that we already know. And I have examples of that, but I won't belabor it here.
I mean, and I was just thinking about what you're saying, like the panels and just seeing just the experiment, basically, for all intents and purposes. You might not call it that, but for your scientists, in a way, developing the system, you mentioned organizations, and you taught in many, many organizations. What are the biggest challenges bringing something like this to so going deep into our development and personal history? What are some of the greatest challenges bringing this into organizations?
That's a good question. There's a couple of big challenges. One is that when you go into a business or organization, oftentimes you have what's called a captive audience. People are there because they're told to be there by their boss. It's one of the training programs. Of course, it's training for leadership, training for teams, training for communication, using the Enneagram as a framework. It's not, again, the Enneagram doesn't provide us with all this kind of training materials, but all of what's available, and there's a lot of great resources in terms of professional development, just like good psychology. There's a lot of great material there. What the Enneagram does is it says, well, look, if you can find your Enneagram type, your likely type anyway, because sometimes it takes a while, you can take those resources and apply them more effectively and more appropriately to your type, right? Like we got to work on different things. You're a type 5, I'm a type 8. So we have some things in common, but a lot of our priority work has been different. You know what I mean? I think like some people need to kind of step forward and be more assertive, and some people need to step back and be a little more receptive, not be trying to run the show all the time. So, but anyway, what's the problem? Well, the problem is there's 9 types. You know what I mean? That's a lot. We don't have a lot of time usually. Hopefully we get a half day followed by other half days. Sometimes we get a whole day. So it has to be fast and it has to be application oriented. The point for businesses is like, how's this going to help us be more, whatever, successful? And I use that in the broad sense, not just to make more money, but to, have a better work environment and so on. And what we can say is, look, even at the beginning level of the Enneagram work, if you can find your Enneagram type, there's a lot of useful feedback that comes. So we don't have a lot of time, but we can say, like, there's different levels. Even at the first level, you get a short list that says, do more of this and do less of this. It's very specific. It's not, you don't have to read the book on effective communication. We just say, look, if you're this type, you have a communication style, or at least to some degree, and, do more of this and do less of this to become a better communicator. Now, in traditional ways, and back in the day before the companies started adopting this, people were very kind of upset about it going into the business world. They're like, it's superficial. You're trivializing a wonderful, deep approach to human development. And I have to say, I'm kind of a fan of the superficial use of the Enneagram. And the reason is because wherever we can go and get people to be kinder to themselves and kinder to others and reduce unnecessary suffering, that's a good thing. And that can happen when people go, oh, so I'm like this type, and what does that mean about me? And it's like, yeah, people know this stuff. They know a lot of this stuff about themselves already, but the Enneagram gives them a way to kind of understand it and what to do with it. And of course, I'm all for taking the Enneagram deeper. I mean, that's been what my life has been about. But, people need this stuff. They need good practical psychology. It's like people saying, how young can we teach this to people, to young people? And it's like, well, probably, mid teenagers. As long as we hold it in a very positive way, again, every type is wonderful. Every type has challenges. It's just good practical psychology. It's not that mysterious. Yeah, you're right. There was a lot of resistance in different kinds of ways.
I love the practical use of it. I'm glad you said that. I kind of want to give some context to my next question. So, who is Helen Palmer and who is David Daniels? I think it's important for those listening to understand who these two are and what they meant to this work.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Well, they were my beloved teachers, and David, unfortunately, died a few years ago, and we miss him a lot. And Helen is retired now, like fully retired. I mean, she doesn't even answer her email. But for many years, Helen started with the Enneagram early on because she did some study with Claudia Naranjo and also Kathleen Spieth. And Helen was a psychologist. When I met her in I guess it was 76 in Berkeley, she was a psychologist. She was teaching psychology at one of the graduate schools here, but she was also a teacher of intuition. She's very intuitive, and she would do intuitive readings for people, which I thought was, I mean, again, that was kind of a stretch for me. Intuitive readings, yeah. But actually, I had some intuitive readings with Helen, and she was like spot on. It was kind of mind blowing. But her point was that everybody has the capacity for intuition. It's basically just a non-cognitive knowing. And so she taught a lot of people, and she worked with a lot of people, and she affected people's lives in a big way. By the time she was ready to teach the Enneagram, she had a list of thousands of people who had worked with her in different ways. And now she's known as the Enneagram teacher and author, which she is. But she had a start in psychology, and then in working with intuition. And at some point, David Daniels, who had come to some of the panel classes in Berkeley, he was actually a psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at Stanford, at the medical school at Stanford. And apparently he had come to Helen in '88 and said, Helen, look, you can't do all the teaching here. We need a training program. And being a good 6 for the first year or two, she said no, and that wouldn't work. And but he was also 6 and hung in there. And then they started a training program for teachers, which is now not only for teachers, but kind of for everybody who wants a deep experience of the narrative work, meaning the panel interviewing. And David was just a brilliant guy, and he advanced the work, and the two of them put their heads together. And of course, with David on board, that had an influence, because he was a professor of psychiatry at Stanford. I mean, he was pretty well credentialed there. Although his peers at Stanford, many of them thought he was, he'd gone nuts or something. But he was also responsible for initiating the first big Enneagram conference, which was held at Stanford in 1994. And it was co-sponsored by the School of Medicine and the Business School. Quite extraordinary. And we had 15 people show up from all over the world, people we'd never heard of. And they say, oh, yeah, we're using Enneagram in Ireland, and it's happening in Japan. And it's, and all of a sudden we realized there was this worldwide, dare I say, movement happening. So that was a big deal.
I know this probably is a difficult question, because I can only imagine how much, both of them being your teachers, but what would be some of the greatest lessons you've learned from, I'll start with Helen Palmer, and then Dr. David Daniels.
Helen has this very sharp focus. She has this ability to focus and concentrate like nobody else. She taught intuition on that basis, as a kind of managing attention, managing your focus of attention. But she was also steeped in many of the religious traditions around the world. She was a scholar, and she knew a lot of stuff around, particularly Christianity and its early roots, where we find evidence of the types, by the way, the personality types, but and Buddhism and Hinduism. I mean, she was just and Judaism. I mean, she knew a lot of that stuff, and she was able to her thing was, let's use spiritual method for psychological development and healing. And so she got us all into this kind of inner practice stuff, which we still do. You've met it in our training, where it's kind of like guided meditation. She was brilliant at these guided meditations. And over the years, I absorbed this. Now I can lead the guided meditations, and meditation is good, right? And to get receptive, the meditation style is the kind of receptive meditation, or the open space where you just follow the breath. You don't use a mantra per se, or an image of divine, which is also great. But in this practice, it's like just follow the breath. It's the empty meditation. And in doing so, you work on being receptive to yourself, receptive to others, and receptive to divine spirit, right? That you have to get there and be receptive to that. So that was her big teaching. And man, it took me a long time to get with, as a type 8. So what do you mean? Or sit around and, Be receptive. What are you talking about? Let's do something. You know what I mean? Let's be active, because we want to be active. But receptivity is such a big deal. And she would say, in order to have a spiritual experience, that comes with receptivity. Because you have to have room for it inside yourself. And she would say the same barriers to spiritual presence are the barriers that also get in the way of knowing ourselves and our true selves, and also the barriers that come up in our relationships. It's the same barriers as basically our type structure and our defenses. And that was very impressive. So that's one of the main things that she taught. And then David, he was like this amazing. He was not only a psychiatrist, but he was also a psychotherapist, meaning he worked with people over many, many years and worked with couples. And he had this big heart and was just a gentle but kind of clear. I mean, he would get in there with people. And so he was very gentle and heartfelt, and yet he would also get right to the point with people. And so watching him interview people and work with people over the years was also a very powerful experience that I feel like I and many others of us have kind of absorbed aspects of who he was and his wonderful qualities. Does that answer the question? That's a long answer, I guess.
No, that's what I wanted, because I wanted to kind of share, because everyone might not know exactly who these great people are. We see the popularity of the Enneagram and books. I've seen a book in the book store. I don't know if they have them on the West Coast, 5 and Below. Like there's these discount stores here on the East Coast, and like I saw an Enneagram book in there. I was just like, wow, from me having to go through the library and and all that in the mid 90s to now, they just got them in random stores. So just to
That's
know
amazing, isn't it?
the foundation that we're standing on, absolutely.
And it's open source code, so to speak. Everybody can jump in. The battle was fought in court, by the way, because Oscar Chazo, who was really not the grandfather, but the guy that kind of started it off by understanding how human personalities or human experience could be arranged around the Enneagram, right? He had this brilliant insight. He wasn't a psychologist. He was more of a spiritual teacher, but he had this brilliant insight. But then he wanted to kind of hold on to it. So he sued Helen for copyright violation because he said, this is my copyright. But long story short, Helen won the lawsuit. Took 9 months of travel to New York and City and the Court of Appeals and all that stuff. But she won the lawsuit. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today talking about this. He would be passing around hidden notes or something.
Yeah.
But it's amazing that everybody can jump in, and most of it makes a contribution. Sometimes I see things that's kind of like, I don't know about that. People kind of come up with new ideas around the Enneagram, and you know what I mean? It's important that it be grounded in people's experience. You know what I mean? You need experience. You can't just like think up new ideas about this stuff because it doesn't necessarily correlate. We don't want to fit people into the system. They want the system to respond to how it is for people. You know what I mean? So if you've worked with thousands of people, you have some credibility around how it is. But anyway, all the wonderful books and podcasts are important and make a contribution. Even the kind of the 1-inch deep stuff, people can maybe at some point they're going to go, wait a minute, let me check this out further. And it's going to start to have an impact on their life and their relationships.
I like that non-dogmatic approach that you're taking, and it being, I like things that are practical. And I love that you see, because you're old school Enneagram, and you go back and you could easily just take the position, this new stuff is just, so I love that you're giving room, to the new, even if it's not deep, you see the utility of it. So I really appreciate that.
Right. I'm not put off, but I mean, again, occasionally I go, wait a minute, I don't know that that's true, but overall, I think it's a great discussion and dialogue, and people all over the internet, of course, are talking about the Enneagram. And probably the main thing that gets people going is relationships, because everybody wants their relationships to work. And here's a method that can actually, it works. The reason why the Enneagram is so successful is because it works. That's really the main reason it got around to all these places. I mean, even the churches, now the evangelical churches in the South, which we thought, well, that's conservative
Yeah.
folks. And I mean, but you know what? At some point, a number of leaders in that community started talking about the Enneagram, wrote some books, and now people that we I don't know how to say we're working to find common ground with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to do that sometimes politically or theologically, but in terms of the Enneagram, we share the Enneagram, and it's remarkable. And there's a language there. You can say, "Well, I'm a 5," and
Yeah.
I know you're more than a 5. We say that, but
Yeah.
when you say, "Well, my personality is a 5," or "I lead with a 5,"
Mm-hmm.
I know something about you, and we can
Yes.
talk
Yes.
quickly, and and also again, it helps me learn more about people who are type 5s. I used to think 5s were all kind of reserved and shut down, and it wasn't easy for me to connect with them. That stereotype is gone.
Mhm.
And people like yourself. Like I told you, I think you're my favorite 5.
I appreciate
Because you're just
that.
so generous with yourself. And anyway,
Wow.
I don't embarrass you, but you know, uh, anyway, blows through stereotypes if you know enough people.
I appreciate that. That was a great compliment. I appreciate that. As we come to a close, I want to be respectful of your time. Um, the narrative Enneagram. Why the narrative Enneagram? Um, I know there are many schools, and I know you're open, and as you show, you're receptive. But what are the benefits? I'm studying with the narrative Enneagram. I love it. And
Right.
and what would you say to people who are trying to decide, how am I going to go with this
Right.
Enneagram? And they come to you and say, well, Peter, why should I study with
Right.
you?
Well, I would say it's I mean, we like it, right? And there are reasons for that. I would also say there's other ways of teaching the Enneagram that really are just fine and work quite well. It kind of depends on the person, you know what I mean? The narrative kind of requires that it means that you're interested in people and you're willing to kind of listen to people, because we say the conversation is really it kind of puts the Enneagram to work. You know what I mean? It's having conversations. That's the basis for the narrative. It's conversations. And so we have this kind of formal panel method where we interview panels of the same type, right? And so we get a number of people on a panel that are 8s or 5s or 3s or 2s or whatever. And so we're listening for, what do they have in common? What's the common theme? Because there's going to be differences, right?
Mhm.
And we're still working on understanding some of those differences, by the way. The narrative now has a big emphasis on diversity and inclusion, and belonging, uh, and understanding how people from different racial backgrounds and cultures, how they show up somewhat differently. You know what I mean? And so, but what is it that's there? What's the central theme? What's our commonality? And
Mhm.
to be able to find that amongst people who are from very different backgrounds, uh, again, it can be very powerful. Well, so we have the panel method, and I think interviewing panels is just wonderful. I've been doing it for a zillion years, and
Mhm.
I'm still interested. I mean, again, if you're interested, because every panel is a little bit different. I know what the books say, and I've written stuff about this too, and it's kind of like, okay, there's only so many ways you can describe 9 types. There's a lot of
Mhm.
a lot of wonderful ways, but at certain points, kind of like, okay, I know this already.
Mhm.
But listening to human beings talk about their life experience in the context of their archetype or their point of view or their their heart, or I mean, to me that just opens up a wonderful learning and again conversation with people. And so because of that, I like the narrative, because it keeps going. And I've again been able to take it to countries all around the world, and it just brings me more close and more connected to people. And I think it helps build community, right? The people in the room, you listen to all 9 panels over the course of 3 days, you're affected. It's not only learning in the head, but also there's something that happens in the heart and also in the body, because we're there together, and even online, which we didn't know if that was going to work, but actually it does work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know that.
Yeah.
In person is kind of better, but online is accessible and affordable. And, you can join from 3,000 miles away. And
Yeah. Yeah. You've taught all over the world, and what's your favorite place to teach and why?
um, that's a tough question. I was just in Singapore, and I had just a wonderful group of young Singaporeans, and they were so enthusiastic. Uh, Mostly Chinese, but some others, Indians, Malaysians. Because it's a multicultural little country,
Mhm.
but mostly Chinese. And it was just great for me to be. I haven't been back to China in 4 years, and so I miss my friends and students over there. And we certified 50 narrative teachers in China over the course of however many 15 years I was going
Hmm.
there. And so I miss that. And China was wonderful and chaotic and stressful and interesting, and all the above. But Singapore was just so, I don't know, people were more relaxed, and they were, I guess, willing to work on themselves.
Hmm.
And I feel happy when that happens. So I wasn't just presenting it to a group of people who at the beginning levels. These were folks who really knew the Enneagram pretty well, and we were able to take it to the next level. And maybe I'm just being impressionable because that was the last major trip I had. So
That's beautiful, beautiful. And in conclusion, Peter, man, first of all, thank you. I and we talked earlier about the popularity of the Enneagram and watching it grow, and now online and podcast, and they got probably, I think you were joking on one of our classes, Enneagram shoe type or whatever. They take the Enneagram and
yeah,
the type of shoes you
I
buy.
know. Brought my ears with the Enneagram. It's like,
But what words of guidance would you give, the new wave of teachers that are popping up, and just those who are currently teaching and those who aspire to teach the Enneagram, with your experience, your, going all over the world, teaching different cultures, man, what would you impart in this new wave of teachers?
Well, again, I would just say once again, I think it's really important that we value each person and each Enneagram type. And that means we have to know something about our own bias. You know what I mean? We got to know how we get reactive to different people and different types. And that's understandable. And just to be able to kind of accept that, okay, I'm reactive, and work with kind of taking a pause and breathing and kind of like settling down and knowing that um, underneath personality, there's a beautiful human being there. And that's something that I like to keep in mind because, of course, I'm an aide, and something I need to remember constantly. Like, how come they're like this? I don't know. Right? And wait a minute, it's okay. Just their personality that I'm having issues with, and also to be appreciative of people and not use the Enneagram as a way to kind of tell people, oh, your personality sucks or something. It's like, no, it's complicated, and there are parts of stuff that we really do need to work on. And the world needs that today because there's a lot of psychological issues that have a big impact, right? People are in denial around certain things, or they don't want to deal with certain stuff, and whether it's race relations or the environment or all that stuff. Having good psychology is really crucial. We have a very wonderful method here, and people do it in different ways, which is fine. But again, I would just encourage everyone to, again, work with acceptance. It doesn't mean we can't be critical. We can be critical, but we can do it in a way that's kind and accepting, and be open to what shows up. Don't get too locked into a particular, well, this is how it is. Like all, fours are like this. All fours, and it's like, well, actually, they're not. There's a really big variety on each of the Enneagram types. Let's keep looking for what's the basic theme, what's the basic character structures underneath, and give people room to show up in the world, in very different ways, even though they may have a personality type.
That's awesome. And how can those who are interested learn more about the narrative Enneagram?
Well, we have a website.
Awesome.
A good website. It's good. It's a lot of work and a lot of money, so it better be. Anyway, it's narrativeenneagram.org, O-R-G, because the Narrative Enneagram is now a nonprofit. It used to be anyway, whatever. It's a small business kind of run out of my house or something. Now there are a lot more people involved. There's a board of directors. We have a staff. There's people to talk to on the phone if you want to call up. Somebody will answer email. And I think it's a good website. It's got a lot of information about what we're doing and what the schedule of programs is, and who the people are. And I like I think it's good website. And then if you're interested in what I'm doing, because I do also my own work as well as the narrative work, I'm at the enneagramatwork.com, and there's articles and stuff there too. So narrativeenneagram.org, the enneagramatwork.com. I'll recommend.
Awesome. Peter, I appreciate your time. I don't take it for granted. And I thank you for honoring me with this. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. The Narrative Enneagram, great people there that I've met. And of course, man, I look forward to continuing to learn with you. Give Pat my love. And
I will.
Thank you so much.
All right. It's a pleasure talking to you.
This is Total Confidence Podcast with Peter O'Harahan. I hope I'm saying your name right. I really was struggling with that, but because I always call you Pete, but Peter. But thank you so much.